Hello aspiring developers, I hope you're doing fine. Welcome back to today's session. Today we are going to learn about propagation, animations, and more on event listeners. So I hope you're ready for today's session. Let's dive right in. From the previous videos, we noticed that you can append list items using the add list button. So we were handling the event, the click event on the button element and then we were calling a function to print these new li elements into the ul elements of our html file. We also tackled the replace image, and we were able to see that when you tap replace image, it replaces the current image with a new image. I also tackled the next image, and we handled this event to output the next images and the previous images also, same thing. So currently we have to tap on the next image and the previous image buttons for us to move to the next image, but you don't want to task your users who are visiting your website with all that work. So currently we want to now use a function, we want to use animation, or rather a timer function method, to automatically move to the next and the previous images. So let's head over to our Visual Studio Code and dive right in. So you can remember this piece of code from the previous examples, and that's exactly what you're going to use once again in this video. So we already have these three images, and I believe instead of styling them directly from JavaScript, you can just style all image attributes in our style.css. So we can just style all image attributes. So say img, so that we can pass these styles that we are passing in JavaScript, the width and the height, such that we can reduce this. Okay, here also have the width and the height, so we can pass all that in our CSS. Say width, give it 100%, and for the height, we passed outer, yeah, such that it fits within the div within this div. So now we want to remove this previous and next image buttons, but you can leave them just in case JavaScript is not loaded fully. Then it can be used as an alternative. So directly we go to our JavaScript. This is how you are implementing the next and the previous. So there is a simple way of doing all that. You can do it by using timers, and you can simply come and say, you can just define another function, say function start animation, or you can say function start, or rather function animate images. Let us be a bit descriptive. So you see we have a function animate images, and you can say that this function should set the interval. There is this set interval function which takes as a parameter two values. One, it is whatever you want to handle, and then the second parameter, it takes the timeout, or rather in milliseconds, the number of the amount of time you want to wait for that before that function is called. So in our case, we can say we set the interval to call the function next, so it calls the function next, and this function next is called after 3 seconds. So 3 seconds will be 3000 milliseconds. Yeah, so we now have our function animate images, and it calls the next function. So here you can just immediately come and say add event listener button. You can say animate images, such that when you click this btn, the btn next or the next button, the next image button, it will start the animate images function, and this function is calling the set interval, and the set interval calls the next function after every 3 seconds. So let's head over to our browser and see the changes that we've made. So you remember that we set that a function in a manner that you have to tap on the next image button, this one below here, such that the process is started. So if you tap the next image, you have to wait for 3 seconds, then set interval will call the next function. So you now see that the images are being displayed after every 3 seconds. But maybe a user will not know that they need to tap on next image for them to see the function, the images being displayed automatically. So we can just have the .onload function for us to handle that event. So let's add the .onload function. So you can just leave this this event handler to call the next. Then we can now set the window.onload such that anytime the onload function is called, we can call the animate images event. So this one will just automate all that process even without the user tapping on the button. So in short, we say that the onload is used to start a user's journey immediately they refresh or immediately they enter the browser. So that is why we use the onload. So I can just go to our Visual Studio Code, we enter our browser, and we see these images being animated. So let's head over to Visual Studio Code, to our browser, sorry. Yeah, so now if you refresh this page, you notice that the images are changing automatically. So the user does not have to click anything, and that is the use of the Windows.onload function. Yeah, so the images are just changing automatically. We can also learn more about handling event. So let us go and learn more about handling events. Yeah, so initially we were learning about event, how to handle event, or rather how to listen to events, and we immediately used the button .add event listener, but there I did not explore all the parameters of the add event listener function. So the add event listener function takes up to 3 parameters. So there is a button .add event listener. So the first parameter that it takes is the event. Let me just use this for now. We're going to change it. Then the third is the function to handle the event, and then the last is what we call the use capture. So we already understand the event, and we gave an example as the click event. So we gave an example of the click event, and for us to handle this click event, we defined a function add. So this function add was the one responsible for the click event. So now what we didn't talk about is this use capture. This use capture, you can think of it as propagation, and propagation goes 2 ways in HTML. There is either propagation from the bottom of the DOM to the top of the DOM, or from the top of the DOM to the bottom of the DOM. So that is what we call bubbling and capturing. So event propagation will allow the definition of the element in the order that the events occur. So you can have, maybe like here you have the add event, and it is this add event is for the button element, and you see that this button element is within another div, within a div container, and that div container, remember, we selected it as okay, let's cut this out. and I'll move back to where the div container is here, parent div. So there's this button.add event listener, and as we said, it takes the click function. The click event calls the add function, and propagation is we said it's use capture, though here you don't say use capture because use capture is one of capturing is one of it, and bubbling is the other one. So this button, as we said, is within it is a child element of a parent element that is called div element with the class parent div, and that is the parent to button element with the ID replace image. So when you call the event listener, you may have, say, 2 event listeners or just 1 event listener, and you want to check whether the first event should be handled, the click event should be handled on the div element first, which is the parent, or on the button first, which is the child. So if you want to specify which event should be handled first, then you can say the bubbling, like we said, there are only 2 events, bubbling and capturing. So bubbling will start with the innermost elements, then move to the outermost element. So in our case here, when we say bubbling, when we pass bubbling as the parameter of the use capture, we are going to have button being the event will be handled on button first, then on the ID, then on the then on the body. Sorry, because the body, yeah, it will first start with the button, then the div with the ID with the class parent div, then it goes to the body because body is now the parent of the div element, and then from the body it goes to the HTML, of which the HTML is the parent of the body tag or element. And now after HTML, that is the exit point, or rather the exit point of that event that you've called. So that is called bubbling, and as we've defined step by step, bubbling goes up the DOM from the child to the parent, and that parent also has another parent, so to that parent, then this body is also has a parent, which is HTML. So when the event occurs up the DOM, then we call that bubbling. But in case you want it to go down the DOM, then that is called capturing. So in capturing, the outermost element event is handled first, and then the innermost event. So when the div elements click event is called, or when you initiate the handling of that event, first it will call the body. The same button, when you click this same button and you're using capturing, it will start with the body, and then it will now move to the div. After that, it will move to the button. You'll understand more of this when you start dealing with items that require us to use capturing or bubbling. For now, you just have to note that capturing goes down the DOM, you capture downwards, and bubbling goes up the DOM. Even for bubbling water, it always starts from the bottom. It becomes hot, and then it starts bubbling up to the top until the top is completely bubbling. So think of it as water bubbles from the bottom to the top. So the same bubbling will also start from the innermost HTML to the outermost HTML. And for capturing, you capture downwards, so you will capture from up to down to where that event has been called. So capturing goes down the DOM and bubbling goes up the DOM. So that's it on the propagation. That was the only part that we did not capture. But now you must note that we are not going to use capture as a value. These I just wrote for you to understand the third parameter that should be passed there. So this use capture is a property, and the property is a Boolean property with 2 values, either true or false, and the default value is false. So by default it is false, and this means that this means that the bubbling propagation is used, because by default when you call an event it starts from the innermost moving to the outermost. So by default you can have use capture as false, but if you want to use capturing, then if you want to use capturing propagation, then you just have to use this as true. So most of the time, and you've even noticed that in all our event listeners we were not passing the third parameter. This is because we want to use bubbling from the innermost to the outermost HTML, and that is why we left it as false. So you only add the third argument when you want to specify whether it's you want to use capturing, but if you want to use bubbling or you want to leave it as default, then you can remove that third parameter. So that is what I wanted to add on the event listeners. So for now I can just leave it as false so you can understand it better. Button.add event listener, picking 3 parameters: event, function to handle the event, and the capture, the use capture boolean state, whether it's true or false. So that's it for the bubble and capture. Another important aspect of event listeners that you need to note, currently we are passing the event listeners directly to our selected buttons. You can also pass this to the button itself, and you come and say here button.onClick. You can now call the event listeners using HTML. So you see that there is the onAbort, the onBlur, onCanPlay, onClick. So when you use HTML, you must use the on, then that property, that event that you want to call. So if you want to call the click event, you say on, then click. Then there you pass in the function that you want to call. So let's say you want to call this replace image function. So you just say on click, then you pass in the replace image, the replace image function. So this does the same thing. This also listens for the clicking of this button. But the only issue is with this is that you can't pass more than one. You can't pass more than one event. So you cannot say on click, then you come again and say on double click, and double click equals next image. How was that called for the next one? It was just called next, yeah. So you'll notice that this will cause problems when we try and implement it on our browser. So we can just go and try tapping on the replace image. First, let us disable this event listener from JavaScript. So we come to JavaScript and we disable the replace. We can also delete this so that it does not confuse us, and we can just add it to the first instance of can just add it here. So now there is that replace image, and I want to remove that from the event listener. Yeah, there is this btn.add event listener replace image. So you can comment this out, then we directly call the replace image function using HTML. So let us see that on our web browser. So you notice that when you tap on replace image, it does the replacing of the image. Let's just refresh the browser and we tap on replace image. You notice that it replaces the image, but when I double tap, it does not call the next function because you cannot pass to event listeners using HTML. Here I have a very simple HTML page. Currently it's blank. It's just a main with a div container and a div box. Then I also have a style. I've styled the container. See, it has a width and a height with a background color and a relative position. The box also has a width, a height, a background color, and the absolute position. So you already know that this box will be on top of this container. For the JavaScript, this is the JavaScript that we're going to use today. So let us just run this script and see how it looks on the browser using the Go Live server. Yeah, now you notice that we have our div with the ID container. This is the green container. Then we have our smaller div with the ID of box, and it is styled to that position. So let me just zoom it in a bit. So you notice that this, we set this width to 275, and we set the width of this box to 75. So this remaining space is a remaining space of a width of 200, and the remaining height also has a space of 200. So it's important to note that difference in space, because we're going to use it to we're going to call some functions using those remaining space. We want to animate this box, this blue box, to move within this green box. So let's head back to our Visual Studio Code and see how we can animate using JavaScript. So first, from the previous few minutes of today's video, we were talking about the intervals. Okay, animate.js. We talked about the interval, the set interval method. So I just want to remind you that this set interval will always be called infinitely unless you pass in a clear interval method. So these two methods go hand in hand. For the previous session, where we were using we were automating the movement of images within and inside an array, we did not need the clear interval because we want the user to consistently be seeing different images sliding through their div container in the website. But now for something like that box moving, if we don't use the clear interval, then the box will infinitely move towards the position we set it to. So that's why we need the clear interval. But let's first start with the set interval. And you remember that set interval takes two main arguments. The first being the function that you want to call. The second being the duration that function is being called. So now I have the set interval with a move function that is being called after every 1 second. You remember this is measured in milliseconds, so you pass in 1000 to denote a second. So the next thing, let's define the move function. So we just define the function move. Yeah. So now every time this interval, every time the browser is loaded, it calls the move function after every 1 second. So what we want is that our div, our container, our box div is moving within the container div. So it will be important to select the container div where the box is moving within. So you can just say, or you can select the box. Yeah, you can just select the box div. So yeah, let's come and say, should we select it inside? You can just select it outside the function first. So you say let box equals document dot get element by id, and you pass in the id, which is box. Now we have already selected the box document. The next thing is we know of the style. Style has a position attribute. So we can pass in, we can first declare a position variable. So let's just say let position equals 0. Now the next thing is that we want this box to move within a div element. We know that the div is 275 pixels in width. You can see both width and height have 275 pixels. So it's important to note that width is 275 px. This is for the container, and it's also important to note that the width for the box is 75 pixels. So the width is 75 pixels for the box, And this message is important because we want to know that the space that remains for the box to move within, because we don't want the box to overflow outside the container. Yeah. So when you take 275 minus 75, we are left with 200 px for the box to dwell within. So now the next thing you can inside the function, you can just say if position, here we should use var because you know about the scope. So you can say if position is greater than or equal to 200, we can now clear the interval. So you can just say here clear interval, and the interval that we're clearing is the one with the move function. Then else, so if the condition is not met, now we want to start animating that box that we are having there. So we pass in the else such that in case the position is not 200, how do we animate the box? You can animate the box by passing the dot style attribute of the box. So you can just say box dot style, then dot position, box dot style, then dot position, and you say equals to, you can say equals to, okay, equals to position. So currently the position is 0. Let's just go slowly by slowly so that you can understand it. We have initialized the position to 0, and this 0 is testing for this width and height of the container versus the box. And you note that you have 200 px of space for the box to move within. So now if at all the position it will be greater than or equal to 200, then you're going to clear the move interval, or rather to stop calling the move function. But if the position is less than 200, we want to increment the position. We can increment it maybe by, we'll use by 10. Will 10 be too small? Can use by 20, such that it can go through 10 iterations. So 20 by 10 will be 10 iterations. So the box will move 10 times to the position that we give it. So the next thing you can say box.style.position. So which position do you want the box to move? You want the box to move to the right, we can use the we want the box to move to the right, yes, we can use the left property, such that the box moves how far away from the left, because you also know about the dot left property. So for now I can comment out this function, and then I add here the left property of CSS. I believe you already know, we already taken through CSS, so we know the basics. And I can give a left property of 20 pixels. So then I can run the browser so that you can see how the left, or rather what the left property means. Also I can add the, I can first leave the left property so you can understand it easier. This box moves 20 px from the right. If we fire up our developer tools, you see our move is not defined because you remember we commented that out. So let's go to elements, then to the body. Inside the main we're having the box here. So you see that left, don't know if this is visible. You see the left property is 20 px, and that moves the box from left to 20 px away from the margin of the container. We also have the top property. So we have another property top, and you can also say you pass a value to this top property. Okay, it's becoming a bit of a problem to add. You say top, then in the top you pass 20 px. Yeah, you notice that the box also moves downwards by 20 pixels. So there is this top property and there is this left property. If you increase the left property to about 200 pixels, you notice that the box moves to the right margin of our div. But if you add it to maybe to 20, you see that it overflows outside the div. So that is why we were talking about the calculation of the size of the container and the size of the box, such that the farthest it will go will be 200, such that when it reaches 200, the left property will not be incremented. And for the top property also, when it reaches 200, the top property will not be the top property will not be incremented. But in case it passes, maybe let's say to 250, you notice 250 px, you notice that it overflows outside the container. You remember the size of the box is 275, so if you use 275, then it will go fully outside the green container. So now we want to play around with this left and with both the left and the top property, but now using JavaScript, because we want to automate the calling of the left and the top property. So let's head back to our Visual Studio Code and we automate this movement of this box. Yeah, so now that you already understand the left property, you can just remove it from our CSS. And now back to JavaScript, we are going to edit that. Let's just uncomment out this move. Now we understand why we are specifying that if the position is greater than or equal to 200, the interval should be cleared. So else we're incrementing the value of position, and the value of position that we're incrementing is the one on the left. So we call the style property of the box element, then the left property of the style property, and there we pass in the new position. So our position here is 20, but now we have to also pass in the pixels, because you remember that if you don't pass in px, then you're absolutely not going to have any value. Yeah, so we have this move, and this one will animate that green blue button box to move from left to right after from left to right by 20 pixels after every 1 second. So let's head over to the browser and see how that is done. So you're able to see that after every 1 second, the box automatically moves towards the right or further away from the left, and you can see here that the left property is incrementing after every 1 second, and when it hits 200 px, the box automatically stops moving. So that is how to animate it. We have simply animated that box to move towards the right. We can also do the same, that so that it moves towards the bottom by adding the top property. So let's add the top property to the box. Yeah, so now we've seen the dot left property in action. Let us also add the dot top property. So box dot style, then dot top. You can say, because it's a square, you can just pass in the same, and you say position, then plus px. So now let's refresh our browser and see both the left and the top properties in action. Yeah, so now if you reload the browser, you notice that the box is uniformly moving towards the right and towards the bottom. And you expect it to move about 10 times, and it hits the bottom and the right. When it hits the bottom margin and the right margin, it stops animating itself. So you can always add the speed. Maybe you can add other boxes within it. So yeah, you can add several other boxes, or you can play around with the speed, or you can play around with the different CSS elements to animate this box even further. But simply that's how animation works. You use the set interval, and the set interval will call a specific function a specific number of times. So you can also animate the container itself, or the green square, to also move within the within this window that is provided. You can also animate this to move within this window. Yeah, so that's it for animations. I believe you can always go and explore further CSS properties and try animating them using JavaScript. And instead of clearing the interval, you can even add some more functions here. You can maybe say position equals 0, such that when position is greater than or equal to 200, position will reset to 0, and then here you can or instead of 0 you can say -20, because this starts from 0 plus 20. So you can set this to -20 such that this will start from 0. So if you save this and you refresh our browser, so now you'll notice that with the new changes that we've made, once it hits the bottom corner, it will go back to the top corner because we've set the position to -20. So it goes back to the top corner after a second. Yeah, so that will be it for the animations, that will be it for the propagation, and that will be it for the event listeners. So I believe we've tackled some, or rather we've softened the tough process of animating using JavaScript. It can be very important when you're trying to style maybe a few of your DOM elements. So now thank you for watching to this point. You can share this video widely. Coming up next will be ECMAScript. Keep tuned in, subscribe, share, comment, and hit that notification bell for you to be notified when ECMAScript video is uploaded. Happy coding week.